Today's Q&A is about bee products. And the question is, the person says, I know that honey is kosher. What about other things that comes from bees, like royal jelly, bee pollen, and things like that? So the answer starts as follows. Honey is an anomaly. It comes from something that's not kosher, a non-kosher insect, a bee, but yet it's kosher anyhow. So the Gemara gives two reasons why that's possible. How could it be that it's kosher even though it comes from a non-kosher animal? And many of the contemporary poskim think that there's a practical difference between those two reasons. And the difference relates to a thing called honeydew honey or forest honey, which is the same, two names for the same thing. And it is made by bees who, instead of feeding on nectar like most bees do, they feed on honeydew, which is a secretion from an aphid. Aphids are a type of insect. So that secretion is sweet and edible, and whether that honey is considered kosher or not may very well depend on the two answers of the Gemara. Depending on the answers might determine the status of this honeydew honey, and hashkachas take different stands on this issue, and it's something that it's worthwhile to speak to your Rav about, whether you decide whether you should or should not be using it. Now, going back to regular honey, even regular honey, which the Gemara tells us is kosher, many hold that you should only buy it with hashkacha if you're buying it, in the store, and that's because you want to make sure that the honey was not heated at the factory and on equipment that would have been used for non-kosher food. And the reason why they would heat it is because it's just very viscous. And in order to get into the bottle, you heat it up in order to make it easier to fill into the bottles. Also is that most honey is filtered to take out parts of the bee that might be stuck in the honey. But in some cases, there are raw honeys that are not filtered at all, and the spots or particles that don't look like honey at all may actually be bee parts, non-kosher parts of the bee. So that's something that also to be looked out for in these raw, unfiltered honeys. And also, there's another thing is that flavored honeys need hashkacha to make sure that the flavoring that was added is kosher. But in this regard, something that's a little confusing because it's common that a honey will be marketed based on the type of nectar that the bees eat. Like, for example, orange blossom honey means this is honey that came from bees who collected their nectar from orange trees. So it's called orange blossom honey, having to do with where they got the nectar from. But it's not a flavoring they didn't add orange flavor into it. And so they're just telling you what kind of a certain type of honey will have a certain type of taste to it, but not because it was added flavored into it. And so that element doesn't have any special reasons why you need hashkacha on it. But if it was truly flavored, then it would need hashkacha. Now, moving away from honey, royal jelly is this creamy, bitter-tasting secretion from bees, which is eaten by the future queen bee, and that's why it's called royal jelly, and by the larvae that are in there. And there are those who hold that it's mutter, but most assume that it is not included in the Torah's special heter for honey. Again, she mentioned beforehand, it comes from a bee, so it's only mutter because of there's a special reason, and most hold that does not apply to royal jelly. Therefore, since it comes from the non-kosher bee, it's also not kosher. While we're on the topic of non-kosher items from bees, there's a homeopathic remedy called, I hope I pronounce this correctly, Apis mellifera, which is an extract made from actual bees, and it is not recommended. Now, in contrast to the royal jelly, there are several reasons to believe. Again, diukim and the poskim to believe that beeswax is kosher. Beeswax is a wax that's secreted by the glands in the bee's abdomen, and it's used to make the honeycomb structure of the hive. And the simplest reason to explain why, aside that we know that it is, the simplest reason to explain why it's kosher is because it's inherently something that's not edible. So although it comes from the non-kosher bee, it's considered pirsha or excrement, and therefore, although the bee is not kosher, the beeswax is okay. Now, all of this relates to things that the bee secretes or produces. Bees also collect things. Bees collect pollen. It's found in the bee's legs in something called the pollen basket. So it's not processed or changed by the bee at all. It's basically the bee is just collecting it for you. So those are okay. That's kosher. They also make two different mixtures. One is pollen, a mix of pollen and nectar, and that makes something called bee bread or ambrosia. and that's fine because the ingredients for that are kosher. Both parts of that are kosher, or they mix plant resins with beeswax to make something called bee propolis. And again, since both of those things are kosher, therefore the mixture, the thing that's made, the propolis itself, is also kosher.